皆さんこんばんにちは、ブシです。本日もよろしくお願いします。すいません、ちょっとね、月火ちょっとね、配信できなくて申し訳ありませんでしたね。ちょっとね、仮眠取ってたんですけどね、やっぱね、あんま起きれなくてね。あと、FOMC 前だったんでね、まあ、同時だったんですよね。月曜から。うーん。ノーポジで行こうってなって思ってて。トレードしてもね、ボラが激しいかなと思って何もしなかったんですよね。なもんで、ちょっとね、あんまやる気なくてね、発信しなかったんですけど。金曜までね、アップルとかね、いろいろ買っててね、上げ相場だったんですよね。上げ相場だったんですけど、月曜からね、あの、月曜もね、上がるかなと思ったんですよね。普通に。でも普通に下がってね、月曜。この上昇ならね、こう、いつもならポンってもう一日上がるかなと思うんですけどね。よりでね、これダメだと思ってすぐ売っちゃってね。利確して、ノーポジで行ったんですけど、FOMC 前まではね、いつもなら上がってから下げるんですけどね。今日ちょっとおかしいですね。で、FOMC 後はすぐドターンって下がるんですけど、でもね、まだこの位置ならまだ買われすぎっていうことで、まだ下げしろあるんですよね。範囲外まで下がる可能性はあるっちゃあるんですよね。もうちょっとね、上がってたら分かりやすかったんですけどね。今日下げなのかなって思ったりもするんですよね。7月の FOMC は普通に上がっていったんで、そうね。わかんない。今普通に若干の裏りすぎあって、7月の FOMC をちょっと踏襲するかもしんない可能性があるね。なんで上げかもしんないですね。ちょっと。この状態なら。下げ進行で来てるからな。下げ進行で FOMC 来てるから。やっぱ7月っぽいよね、動き的には。7月の、7月でバウンドして、またちょっと、もみ合う可能性あるかもね。今日上がるかもしんないね。上がる可能性の方が高いね、ちょっとね。下げしろちょっとあるけど、でも下がる可能性もあるから、今日はね、一日何もせず、ノーポジで待ってた方が、明日からトレードした方がね、いいっすよね、普通にね。普通にいいっすね。今日上げててもちょっとね、明日にまたガラッと変わるかもしれないんで。で、4日雇用統計なんで、そのうち雇用統計でまたね、変わっちゃうんで、 変わるっていうか、こういう時で下げそうな気がするんですよね。だね。11月。統計。あ、くのみさんこんばんです。今日は3時から FOMC まで、FOMC なんでね、パウエルさんの会見ですかね。まあ、それまでちょっと起きながら、株をね、見ていく感じですかね。今日下げてますけどね。私も様子見ですね。まあ、そうなんですよ。別にFOMC 当日にトレードしても別に翌日からやってもね、全然間に合いますからね。で、当日から翌日がね、ガラッと変わる時があるんで、翌日に、当日上げて翌日ガクッと下がる時があるんで、ちょっと、FOMC の日はあんま動かさない方がね、いいっすね。てか今週雇用統計もあるんでね。雇用統計待ってから入ってもいいかもしれないですね。なんで金曜を見てから入るっていうのがいいかもしれないですね。まあ、よくは言えば11月10日の、うーん、荒れるって、あんまり下がる未来、あんまり下がる未来があんま見えないかなっていうのもありますね。あるとしたら、今日、明日上げて雇用統計で落ちるっていうのがありそうな感じするんですよね。まあ多分雇用統計いいっていう結果出るんで、利上げスピードが速くなるっていうことで、利上げ全然してもいいかなってことで、落ちるかなとは思うんですけどね。で、今日、普通にパウエルさんの回転下げて、雇用統計も下がるっていうシナリオもありますね。問題、それは、この最安値ですかね。それを下回る衝撃ぐらいの下げかどうかですよね。今日上がってたらね、否定され、ああ、そうですか。ジャクソンホールからね、言葉だけで下げるようになってきましたからね。上がってたら上がってた人のロスカット巻き込んで、ここ貫通できるんですけどね。そうなんですか。 そういうのがあったんですか？上がってたね。ロスカット巻き込んでね、ここまで落とす、貫通するパワーが出てくるんですけどね。今、若干、下がり気味ですからね。これくらいのパワーを持ったら、このレジスタンス、サポートラインか。サポートライン貫通っていうのがあったんですけど、今の状態だとこのサポートラインを貫通するぐらいしかパワーがないかなっていう。この最安値を割る貫通っていうのはちょっとないかもしんないなっていう。このポジションで、今このポジションが、ここだとすると、この下まで売られ込んで、売られ込めまでいけるかなっていう感じですよね。6%か、最大6%ぐらいの下げ。6%下げが、ここから発生するかですよね。6%下げあり得るのか。取れたらうまいけど。でも6%下げしてもここら辺までしかいかないからな。今日明日でそこまでいけるかっていう感じですけど。会見ならそこまで下がるっていうのが前あったんで、いけるかなっていう。でもこのゾーンならね、ちょっとね、上側にね、買いで持ってるパワーがあんまないかな。あるのかな、どうかな。買いでパワー持って強いかな。買いで持ってるとロスカット巻き込めるかなっていう感じなんですよね。逆に上がるとなるとこのパターンにはまるんだよな。もうこっちは上げ相場からの、上げからの FOMC で落ちて、FOMC で上がるっていうパターンか。まあちょっと、実際、産地から見ないとわかんないよねっていう。まあ、そういうことですね。なんで、3時までゲームやるしかないっていうね。 FOMC、会見後に上がるようであれば、まあ、それ乗っても1日ぐらいですかね。まあ、金曜で。金曜、まあ、木曜の引けぐらいに利確して、引けに利確しないといけないけど、持っても1日ぐらいですよね。上層に乗るとしてもね。で、下落に乗るとしてもちょっとね、下落に乗るとしたら、まあ、雇用統計でも下がると思うんでね。まあ、雇用統計見ても持っててもいいかもしれないですけど。まあ、今回の動きで乗るとしたらもう1日限定ですかね。持つのはね。また雇用統計からまた入っても全然いいですからね。まあ、どうなるかですね。じゃあちょっと、あれですね。ちょっと決算見ていくか。ちょっと、小期の予約してからちょっと決算見ていきます。ちょっとね、ここまで下がるとはね、ちょっと思ってなかったですね。FOMC 前にね。利上げが緩くなる観測が出てるんで、普通に FOMC 前でも上がっていいかなと思ったんですけど、ちょっとみんな警戒して利確っていうかね、売ってますね。ちょっと予想外れたんでね。最近ずっと予想外しまくりなんで、あんま自信ないですよね。まあでも3時までね、まだ全然時間ありますから。まあ買うとしたら、まあ普通にアップルかな。アップル、テクル関係かなっていう。ちょっと半導体はね、ちょっと、半導体今勢いいいけどね。半導体もいいのかなっていう。そうくるね。ちょっと若干中国からロックダウンしてくるんで、怖いっすよね、買うのね。あ、でもアップルもロック、組み立て工場も 中国であるから、ロックダウンすると、もろ、やばいのか。だとしたらもう、キュアしか買えねえなっていう感じかな。キュア。あ、でも、あと原因も、ロックダウンしちゃうと、中国の景気悪いと、原因下がっちゃう可能性あるんで、ちょっとエネルギーも手出しづらいっすね。あ、全装って焼いてますね。みんなやる気なくなったのかな。全然装って焼いてない。いいや、ちょっと。じゃあ、決算がいい株をちょっと探すか。えーっと、AMD、悪かったんですけど上がってるっていう。決算悪かったんですけど上がってるっていう謎の感じですね。これ売りに、売ってもいいかもしんないね。これは。逃げ場だと思う。クリーンハーバーズ。クリーンハーバーズ。クリーンハーバーズ。クリーンハーバーズ。これは決算良かったですね。ちょっと何の会社かわかんないけど。ああ、リサイクル関係だ。産業配給会社なの。でもそれで利益上げてるってことは、なかなかやりますねっていう。あ、下げから上がってんだ、今日。かなりの、下げから、時間外から上げてきたのか。時間外下がったけど。ズームインフォ。ZI。ズーム。ズームビデオね。なんだこれ。うわ、びっくりした。下にあんじゃん、めっちゃ。決算良かったんですけどね。めちゃくちゃ下げてるんですよね。これ反発買いしても良かったっていう感じなんですよね。ちょっと一日の動きはわかんないけど、まあそういうこと。あ、違う。あ、でも下がったんだ。なるほど。 スケベ買いしたけど、失敗したって感じやのか。ここら辺の人。上がるかなと思って買ったけど、普通に、7、8%食らってんのか。でもこんだけ下がったら上がると思って買っちゃうよね、全部ね。普通に売り上げ良かったんですけどね。全然いいんだけど、なんでこんな下がる意味がわかんないんだけど。どうすりゃよかったのこれ。売り上げ、収益も売り上げも全然高いしね。これはもう、どうすることもできない。あ、フリーキャッシュフローのガイダンスから下方修正が入ったの。ああ、それで売られてんだ。そんなに、フリーキャッシュフローとか、そのガイダンスが悪かったの。そんなとこ普通見ないよっていう。じゃあちょっと、様子見かな。ちょっとまだ売られる可能性あるんで、ちょっと決算悪かったに入れとこうか。ハーモニーバイブサイエンシーズ。ハーモニー。ハーモニー。これは決算良かったですね。でも若干高値付近なんでね。ちょっとね、買いにくいっすよね。いや、もう高値すぎるんで。これはね、高値すぎんで落ちる、買われすぎ感が強いんで。めちゃくちゃ利益上がってんな。サプライズはすごすぎる。
馬の実 ZI はだいぶ前に不正会計疑惑があった会社だったと思うからおすすめ。
あ、そうなんですか。ああ、なるほど。そうだったんすか。知らなかった。知らなかった。モンデリーズですね。モンデリーズ。で、モンデリーズ。まあ、決算良かったですね。あ、でも薄いな、板が。違う、これ、違うぞ。なんだこれ。イギリスの会社なの。いや、これなんか違うな。モモンデリーズ。出てこないな。MDZ。ナチュラルガシア。ちょっと違うな。わけわかんない。あ、食品会社ね。ティッカーシンボル。MDLZ か。なるほど。MDZ。でもやっぱ高値圏なんでね、一旦売られちゃうね。決算良かったみたいですけど。 決算良かったんですけど、高値期ですね。クロロックスですね。クロロックス。CLX。下がってるな。決算良かったんですけど。こんな下がるもんな。決算良かったよね。サプライズあったしね。でも、ハーマージ。営業利益上がってるよね。なんかダメなんこれ。売り上げもまあ横ばいですけど。なぜか下がっていく。こんな下がるもんな。決算良かったんですけどね。これ上がるんじゃねえの？なんでこれダメなの？ CLX。横ばいだからダメなの。普通にこれなら、上がってもいいかなって感じするけどね。ダメなんだ。いや、B&B。いや、B&B。下がってるね。決算、良かった。売り上げも別に良かったんですけど、ダメなんだ。ダメなんだ、これで。そんな下げてないけど、そんな下げてなくてダメなんだ。ダメなんだ。上がると思うけどね。ダメか。ニューモント。ニューモントダメだろう。決算悪かった。ニューモント。下がるだろう。これは下げでしょう。まだ下げしあるからこれ売ってもいいかもしんないね。ニューモント。 売り上げなんかすごいやばいね。ウーバーイーツかしら。ウーバーイーツ、ウーバー。売り上げ上がってますね。うん。決算良かったですね。ウーバー。ウーバーってあれっすよね。これタクシーでじゃなかったっけ？配車アプリですよね、これ。ウーバー。いや、良かったからこれ上がるとんだけどな。時間が、時間外で上がりすぎたから今下がってるのか。試合で。試合で下がったのか。だったら変えてもいいかもしれない。ファイザー。間違えた。ファイザー。ファイザー、全然良かったですね。ファイザー。良かったんですけど、下がってんね。今ちょっと買われすぎた感で売られてんのかな。うん、上がるとしたら買ってもいいかなっていう。上がり相場なら買ってもいいと思う。イーライリリ。これ年初に買ってたらかなりすごかったですね、イーライリリ。かもしれないですけど。こんだけパフォーマンスいいとは。それ、ニーサ一括だったらこれ、イーライリリ良かったですね。ガイダンスがちょっと悪かったわけですけど、まあ、普通にイーライリリいいですね。イーライリリ。ファイザー、イーライリリ。オンセミコンダクターは良かったんですけど、半導体ちょっとね、買いにくい。決算の割にはちょっと上げ幅がちょっと少ないかなっていう感じですかね。
馬の実、エアルブンブンもウーバーも累積赤字があるうちは手を出したらダメなイメージ。
ああ、そうなんですか。えそうなんですか。赤字あるんですか。知らなかったですね。純利益がマイナスだとやばいのかな。それが赤字ってことかな。ああ、確かに普通の会社だと純利益プラスになってますね。 確かにここら辺赤字ありますよね。ああ、なるほど。ちょっと、ああ、なるほどね。そういうことか。赤字ですか？ちょっと見てみますけど。ウーバー。
ウーバーって累積赤字が毎年増えていません。
累積赤字をちょっと見方がちょっとわかんないですけど。純利益はマイナスになってますね。マイナスいつもつけてますね。ちょっとね、自分はちょっと見方わかんないですね。合計、これ合計のとこ見ですかね。確かに増えてますね。利益、マイナスがね。いや、ここでまた一旦下げてくるのか。ビックス上がってないのに下げちゃうんですね。でもビックス上がってんのか。上がってんのか。下げなのか、今日は。3時になったらわかるからね。まだやばいとこぶち抜いてないから。ここら辺ぶち抜いてないから。ただ反発の余地はあるけど。ちょっと3時ですかね。ちょっと、11やっていきますか。3時まで。11やっていきますか。ちょっと。 よし。あら、早いな。いきますか。 フラン結構動くね。あれなんか来てんな。なんか来てたわ。ちょっと待って。回復はなしだぜ、これ。あ、桃野先生金払ってたっけな。 あ、いけた。倒せたわ。あ、誰か死んだ。キング死んじゃったわ。 ああ、ちょっと MP ないか。ドラム先生 MP カツカツやな。危ねえ。 やべ、ちょっとまずい。これ強い、なんか、やばいな。ヒートちゃん死んじゃった、ちょっと。いや、なんか辛いな、ロックフィンが。マツコいるかな。マツコいるわ。マツコ殺さねえと。あ、しまった魔法セット、そのままでよかったじゃん。よし、失敗したわ。 やべ。会期って3時からっすよね。まあ3時半か。30分後 ?3 時に制作記念発表。やべ、こっち来たった。メモリが確保できませんでした？おいおいおい。メモリーとは。 メモリーが確保できない。なんでや。ちょっと今ね、マツコが近くにいるんで、この辺でいいかな。ちょっと、なんで来んの？マジか。ちょっと待って。マジか。ちょっと待って。来るわ、こっちに。やば、殺される。もう、マツコめ。あともうちょっとあったのに。 じゃあ行きますかね。が、ちょっと、密集して、ちょっと全然動けねえ。動けねえ。危ねえ。さっきの麻痺してくれた、少し。バインドストーム入れたら、魔法やめてくれるかな。全然やめてくれないね。 小箱いらないんじゃ。小箱はもう。5歩取って終わりかな。ボスはね、いけないんじゃないかな。ボスきつそうだな。うーん。あんま殺さない、いっぺんに殺さないようにしないといけないからね。 あ、出たな。いいよ、これで。まあ、こんなもんすかね、今日は。ボスはね、ちょっとマツコがね、ちょっと、時間かかっちゃったんでね、いけなかったっすね。赤。赤持ってなかった気がする。ダブルアタックなんだ。文句。和洋さん文句いいね。あ、文句2個持ってたわ。キトじゃ戦士絶対いらないっしょ。まだ、アンバス一回も行ってないね。ちょっと、ベガリ行ってみるか。金策で。記憶のページがね、どれくらい取れなくなるかね、見てみたいですね。 間違えた。間違えた。3時半に 3時半だよね。3時半だよね。上がり始めましたね、相場の方ね。あんま出なくなったなぁ。 上がってんね。やべ。カルカリアンしなかったわ。やっと当たり引いたけど、 なんかキャンペーンじゃなくても、そこそこページ出る気がしますね。あ、すごい上がってる。ちょっと待って。ああ、下がった。びっくりした。めっちゃ上がったと思ったら、下がった。上がんのか。天井まで突き抜けたな。天井突き抜けたんだけど。どこまで行ったんだろう。ああ。普段下がるんですけどね。
今のみドル円が下がっているのが不思議な感じ。
ああ、ドル円も下がってますね。ドル円下がるんですね。 利上げしたんですけどね。まあ会見したいでしょうね。こっからどうなるかが。待って待って待って。待って待って待って待って。やっと得たけど。
馬の実上に行くみたいですね。
まあちょっと会見したいですね。まだわかんないですね。
馬の実、綺麗な下なのが不思議だけど。
まあまだまだちょっと、終わりね、終わって、引けまでちょっと、見ていく感じですかね。まあ、こっから買う、もう、まあ、こっから買うとしても、こっから買うのはちょっと、まあ、一旦ちょっと上がったけどね、もうちょっと、かな。ちょっと横ばいなのが気になりますね。記憶のページがあんま出なくなりましたね。 そろそろもう出てほしいんだけどね、ボスね。あ、ペフリじゃん。でねちょっと。でねボスでねあ、すいません。ちょっとマイク触っちゃいました。 3層目、長いな普通に失敗引くと。敵の数多すぎ。ああ、できたな待ってよ。あ、3分で倒せるんか、こいつ。3分じゃ無理だろう。もういいや、ちょっと、絡まれずにしよう。あと1分じゃ無理だろう。 あと1分あったら時間かってたな。さあ、パブレさんの会見見るか。そうね、記憶のページね、めっちゃ出ないね。キャンペーン中じゃないと。激減2倍、半分くらいしか出ないね。YouTube かな。なんか、テキストこれあって。翻訳がこれで。始まっちゃうと、ちょっとトイレ行ってきます。トイレ行ってきます。トイレ行きます。まあ、12月のことなんか喋らんと思うけどね。安易に。で、トイレ行きます。
Good afternoon. My colleagues and I are strongly committed to bringing inflation back down to our 2% goal. We have both the tools that we need and the resolve it will take to restore price stability on behalf of American families and businesses. Price stability is the responsibility of the Federal Reserve and serves as the bedrock of our economy. Without price stability, the economy does not work for anyone. In particular, without price stability, we will not achieve a sustained period of strong labor market conditions that benefit all. Today, the FOMC raised our policy interest rate by 75 basis points, and we continue to anticipate that ongoing increases will be appropriate. We are moving our policy stance purposefully to a level that will be sufficiently restrictive to return inflation to 2%. In addition, we're continuing the process of significantly reducing the size of our Restoring price stability will likely require maintaining a restrictive stance of policy for some time. I will have more to say about today's monetary policy actions after briefly reviewing economic developments. The U.S. economy has slowed significantly from last year's rapid pace. Real GDP rose at a pace of 2.6% last quarter, but is unchanged so far this year. Recent indicators point to modest growth of spending and production this quarter. Growth in consumer spending has slowed from last year's rapid pace, in part reflecting lower real disposable income and tighter financial conditions. Activity in the housing sector has weakened significantly, largely reflecting higher mortgage rates. Higher interest rates and slower output growth also appear to be weighing on business fixed investment. Despite the slowdown in growth, the labor market remains extremely tight, with the
75のね、
unemployment rate
0.75 のね。
low, job vacancies still very high, and wage growth elevated. Job gains have been robust, with employment rising by an average of 289,000 jobs per month over August and September. Although job vacancies have moved below their highs, and the pace of job gains has slowed from earlier in the year, the labor market continues to be out of balance, with demand substantially exceeding the supply of available workers. The labor force participation rate is little changed since the beginning of the year. Inflation remains well above our longer-run goal of 2%. Over
こういう
the
の
12
こと
months
話して
ending
る
in
けど、
September, total PCE prices rose 6.2%, excluding the volatile food and energy categories. Core PCE prices rose 5.1%. And the recent inflation data again have come in higher than expected.
待って、この
Price pressures remain evident across a broad range of goods and services. Russia's war against Ukraine has boosted prices for energy and food and has created additional upward pressure on inflation. Despite elevated inflation, longer-term inflation expectations appear to remain well anchored, as reflected in a broad range of surveys of households, businesses, and forecasters, as well as measures from financial markets. But that is not grounds for complacency. The longer the current bout of high inflation continues, the greater the chance that expectations of higher inflation will become entrenched. The Fed's monetary policy actions are guided by our mandate to promote maximum employment and stable prices for the American people. My colleagues and I are acutely aware that high inflation imposes significant hardship as it erodes purchasing power, especially for those least able to meet the higher costs of essentials like food, housing, and transportation. We are highly attentive to the risks that high inflation poses to both sides of our mandate, and we're strongly committed to returning inflation to our 2% objective. At today's meeting, the committee raised the target range for the federal funds rate by 75 basis points. And we are continuing the process of significantly reducing the size of our balance sheet, which plays an important role in firming the stance of monetary policy. With today's action, we've raised interest rates by 3.75 percentage points this year. We anticipate that ongoing increases in the target range for the federal funds rate will be appropriate in order to attain a stance of monetary policy that is sufficiently restrictive to return inflation to 2% over time. Financial conditions have tightened significantly in response to our policy actions, and we are seeing the effects on demand in the most interest rate sensitive sectors of the economy, such as housing. It will take time, however, for the full effects of monetary restraint to be realized, especially on inflation. That's why we say in our statement that in determining the pace of future increases in the target range, we will take into account the cumulative tightening of monetary policy and the lags with which monetary policy affects economic activity and inflation. At some point, as I've said in the last two press conferences, it will become appropriate to slow the pace of increases as we approach the level of interest rates that will be sufficiently restrictive to bring inflation down to our 2% goal. There is significant uncertainty around that level of interest rates. Even so, we still have some ways to go, and incoming data since our last meeting suggests that the ultimate level of interest rates will be higher than previously expected. Our decisions will depend on the totality of incoming data and their implications for the outlook for economic activity and inflation. We will continue to make our decisions meeting by meeting and communicate our thinking as clearly as possible. We're taking forceful steps to moderate demand so that it comes into better alignment with supply. Our overarching focus is using our tools to bring inflation back down to our 2% goal and to keep longer-term inflation expectations well anchored. Reducing inflation is likely to require a sustained period of below-trend growth and some softening of labor market conditions. Restoring price stability is essential to set the stage for achieving maximum employment and stable prices in the longer run. The historical record cautions strongly against prematurely loosening policy.
2%まで強いインフレ政策をやるっていうこと？
To conclude, We understand that our actions affect communities, families, and businesses across the country.
これはちょっと
Everything we do
タカ派
is in
的な
service
発
to
言
our
なの
public
か。
mission. We at the Fed will do everything we can to achieve our maximum employment and price stability goals. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. Colby Smith with the Financial Times. On the need to slow the pace of rate increases at some point, is a downshift contingent on a string of better inflation data specifically between now and, let's say, the December meeting? Or is that something that the Fed could potentially proceed with independent of that data, given the lagged effects that you mentioned?
So a couple things on that. We do need to see inflation coming down decisively, and good evidence of that would be a series of down monthly readings. Of course, that's what we'd all love to see, but I've never thought of that as the appropriate test for slowing the pace of increases or for identifying the appropriately restrictive level that we're aiming for. We need to bring our policy stance down to a level that's sufficiently
12月どうする
bring
かの
inflation
話
down to
か
our 2% objective over the medium term. How will we know that we've reached that level? Well, we'll take into account the full range of analysis and data that bear on that question, guided by our assessment of how much financial conditions have tightened, the effects that tightening is actually having on the real economy and on inflation, taking into consideration lags, as I mentioned. We will be looking at real rates, for example, all across the yield curve and all other financial conditions and as we make that assessment.
これベアじゃねえか。
Hi,
下げじゃ
Howard
ね
Schneider with
高
Reuters.
派
Look,
的
I'm sure there's going to be tons of confusion out there about whether this means you're going to slow in December or not. Would you say that the bias right now is not for another 75 basis point increase?
So, what I want to do is put that question of pace in the context of our broader tightening program, if I may, and talk about the statement language along the way. So I think you can think about our tightening program as really addressing three questions. The first of which was and has been how fast to go. The second is how high to raise our policy rate. And the third will be eventually how long to remain at a restrictive level. So on the first question, how fast to tighten policy, it's been very important that we move expeditiously, and we have clearly done so. We've moved 3 3/4% since March, admittedly from a base of 0. It's a historically fast pace, and that's certainly appropriate given the persistence and strength in inflation and the low level from which we started. So now we come to the second question, which is how high to raise our policy rate, and we're saying that we'd raise that rate to a level that's sufficiently restrictive to bring inflation to our 2% target over time, and we put that into our post-meeting statement because that really does become the important question we think now is how far to go, and I'll talk more about that. We think there's some ground to cover but before we meet that test, and that's why we say that ongoing rate increases will be appropriate. And as I mentioned, incoming data between the meetings, both the strong labor market report, but particularly the CPI report, do suggest to me that we may ultimately move to higher levels than we thought at the time of the September meeting. That level is very uncertain, though, and I would say, we're going to find it over time. Of course, with the lags between policy and economic activity, there's a lot of uncertainty. So we note that in determining the pace of future increases, we'll take into account the cumulative tightening of monetary policy as well as the lags with which monetary policy affects economic activity and inflation. So I would say as we come closer to that level, move more into restrictive territory, the question of speed becomes less important than the second and third questions. And that's why I've said at the last two press conferences that at some point it will become appropriate to slow the pace of increases. So that time is coming, and it may come as soon as the next meeting or the one after that. No decision has been made. It is likely we'll have a discussion about this at the next meeting, a discussion. To be clear, let me say again, the question of when to moderate the pace of increases is now much less important than the question of how high to raise rates and how long to keep monetary policy restrictive, which really will be our principal focus.
If I could follow up on that, to what degree was there an importance or weight given to a need to signal this possibility now, given all the concerns really around the globe about Fed policy sort of driving ahead and everybody else, dealing with their own stress as a result?
Well, I think I'm pleased that we have moved as fast as we have. I don't think we've over-tightened. I think there's very difficult to make a case that our current level is too tight, given that inflation still runs well above the federal funds rate. So I think that at this meeting, the last two meetings, as I've mentioned, I've said that there would come a point, and this was a meeting at which we had a discussion about what that might mean, and we did discuss this, and as I mentioned, we'll discuss it again in December. But there's I don't have any sense that we've over-tightened or moved too fast. I think it's been good and a successful program. That we've gotten this far this fast. Remember though that we still think there's a need for ongoing rate increases, and we have some ground left to cover here, and cover it we will.
Nick Tamaros of the Wall Street Journal. Chair Powell, core PCE
私たちは
inflation on a 3 or
早く
6 month
動いた。
annualized basis and on a 12-month basis has been running in the high fours, close to 5%.
そうで
Is
す
there any
ね。
reason to think you won't have to raise rates at least above that level to be confident that you are imparting enough
まあ
restraint
今日は
to
そん
bring
な
inflation down?
トレードしない方が
So
いいかも
this
し
is
れ
the
ないです
question
ね。
of does the
まあ下か
policy
らの
rate
方が。
need to get above the inflation rate? And I would say there are a range of views on that. That's the classic Taylor principle view. But I would think you'd look more at a forward, a forward-looking measure of inflation to look at that. But I think the answer is we'll want to get the policy rate to a level where it is where the real interest rate is positive. We will want to do that. I do not think of it as the single and only touchstone, though. I think you put some weight on that. You also put some weight on rates across the curve. Very few people borrow at the short end of at the federal funds rate, for example. So households and businesses, if they're very meaningfully positive interest rates all across the curve for them, credit spreads are larger, so borrowing rates are significantly higher, and I think financial conditions have tightened quite a bit. So I would look at that as an important feature. I'd put some weight on it, but I wouldn't say it's something that is the single dominant thing to look at.
If I could follow up, what is your best assessment or the staff's best assessment right now of the current rate of underlying inflation?
I don't have a specific number for you there. So there are many models that look at that. And I mean, one way to look at it is that it's a pretty stationary object, and that when inflation runs above that level, for sure, substantially above for some time, you'll see it move up, but the movement will be fairly gradual. So I think that's what the principal models would tend to say. But I wouldn't want to land on any one assessment. There are many different, as you know, people who publish an assessment of underlying inflation.
Thank you.
Hi, Chair Powell. Thank you for taking our questions. Gina Smilek, New York Times. I wonder, do you see any evidence at this stage that inflation is or is at risk of becoming entrenched?
Is inflation becoming entrenched? So I guess I would start by pointing to expectations. So if we saw longer-term expectations moving up, that would be very troubling. And they were moving up a little bit at the middle part of this year, and they've moved now back down. That's one piece of data. Shorter-term inflation expectations moved up between the last meeting and this meeting, and we don't think those are as indicative, but they may be important in the wage-setting process. There's a school of thought that believes that, so that's very concerning. I guess the other thing I would say is that the longer we're now 18 months into this episode of high inflation, and we don't have a clearly identified scientific way of understanding at what point inflation becomes entrenched. And so, the thing we need to do from a risk management standpoint is to use our tools forcefully but thoughtfully and get inflation under control, get it down to 2%, get it behind us. That's what we really need to do and what we're strongly committed to doing.
Hi, Chair Powell. Thank you for taking our questions. Rachel Siegel from the Washington Post. The statement points to the lag times. I'm wondering if you can walk us through how you judge those lag effects, what that timeline looks like over the coming months or even a year, and where you would expect it to show up in different parts of the economy.
Yeah, so the way I would think about that is, it's a commonly, for a long time, thought that monetary policy works with long and variable lags, and that it works first on financial conditions, and then on economic activity, and then perhaps later than that even on inflation. So that's been the thinking for a long time. There was an old literature that made those lags out to be fairly long. There's newer literature that says that they're shorter. And the truth is, we don't have a lot of data of inflation of this high in what is now the modern economy. One big difference now is that it used to be that you would raise the federal funds rate, financial conditions would react, and then that would affect economic activity and inflation. Now, financial conditions react well before, in expectation of monetary
やっ
policy.
ぱ雇用統計見てから入った方がいいのかな。
It has moved for a quarter of a century in the direction of financial conditions, then monetary policy, because the markets are thinking what is the central bank going to do, and there are plenty of economists that also think that once financial conditions change, that the effects on the economy are actually faster than they would have been before. We don't know that. I guess the thing I would say is it's highly uncertain, and so from a risk management standpoint, it would be irresponsible not to ignore them, but you want to consider them, but not take them literally. So I think it's a very difficult place to be, but I would tend to want to be in the middle, looking carefully at what's actually happening with the economy, and trying to make good decisions from a risk management standpoint, remembering, of course, that if we were to over-tighten, we could then use our tools strongly to support the economy, whereas if we don't get inflation under control because we don't tighten enough, now we're in a situation where inflation will become entrenched, and the employment costs in particular, will be much higher potentially. So from a risk management standpoint, we want to be sure that we don't make the mistake of either failing to tighten enough or loosening policy too soon.
And if I could follow up, should we interpret the addition to the statement to mean that more weight is put into those lag effects than they would have been after previous rate hikes?
So I think as we move now into restrictive territory, as we make these ongoing rate hikes and policy becomes more restrictive, it'll be appropriate now
まあ
to be
雇
thinking
用
about that. Of
統
course,
計はいいと
we
思
think
うか
about
ら、
the lags are just sort of a basic
う
part
ん、
of
ビアで入って
monetary
もいいかも
policy,
しれ
but
ないな。
we will be thinking about them. But we won't be, I think we'll be considering them, but because it's appropriate to do so. Let me say this: it is very premature to be thinking about pausing. So people, when they hear lags, they think about a pause. It's very premature, in my view, to think about or be talking about pausing our rate hike. We have a ways to go. Our policy, we need ongoing rate hikes to get to that level of sufficiently restrictive, and we don't, of course, we don't really know exactly where that is. We have a sense, and we'll write down in the December meeting, a new summary of economic projections, which updates that. But I would expect us to continue to update it based on what we're seeing with incoming
う
data.
ん。
Thanks, Chair Powell. Neil Irwin with Axios. As you look around the economy, the clearest impact of your tightening so far has been on housing, maybe some venture-funded tech companies. It's been relatively narrow in terms of the labor market, consumer demand, a lot of sectors you don't see a ton of effect. Is the pathway and channels through which monetary policy works changing? Is it narrower than it used to be? And on housing in particular, are you at all worried that you're crimping housing supply in ways that might cause problems down the road?
I don't know that the channels through which policy works have changed that much. I would say a big channel is the labor market, and the labor market is very, very strong, very strong. And households, of course, have strong balance sheets. And so we go into this with a strong labor market and excess demand in the labor market, as you can see through many different things, and also with households who have strong spending power built up. So it may take time. It may take resolve. It may take patience. It's likely to get inflation down. I think you see from our forecasts and others that it will take some time for inflation to come down. It'll take time, we think. Sorry, was I getting to your question there? Housing, the housing part of it. Yeah, so, we look at housing. Of course, housing is significantly affected by these higher rates,
う
which are
ん。
really back where they were before the global financial crisis. They're not historically high, but they're much higher than they've been. And you're seeing housing activity decline. You're seeing housing prices growing at a faster rate, and in some parts
下
of
げ
the
臭い
country
な
declining. You know, I would say housing was
上
the
がっ
housing market was very overheated for the
もう普
couple
通ラン
of
ナー
years
パウエルさんの
when
発言値上
demand
がってく
increased
る
and
のよ
rates
ね。
were
上
low.
げ相場だったら。
We all know the stories of how overheated the housing
上げ
market
だっ
was,
たら
prices going up, many bidders, no conditions, that kind of thing. So the housing market needs to get back into a balance between supply and demand. We're well aware that
どうしようかな。入
what's
ろ
going
っか
on
な。
there. You know, from a financial stability standpoint, we didn't see in this cycle the
明
kinds
日
of
待つか。
poor credit underwriting that we saw before the global financial crisis. Housing credit was very carefully
業
much
績
more
悪いやつ
carefully
だけ
managed by
売って
lenders.
待つかっていう
So
のかも
it's
し
a
れ
very
ない。
different situation and doesn't present
AMD だけ
tangible
でも
financial,
売ろ
doesn't
うか
appear to
なって。
present financial stability issues. But no, we do understand that that's really where a very big effect of our policies is.
Hi, Victoria Guida with Politico. I wanted to ask about the labor market. You mentioned early on again that job openings are very high compared to available workers, and I'm
ドン
just
キハト
curious
的なことは言わないってい
to
うこ
what
とで。
extent you do
まあ
and
確かに。
don't draw a signal from that. So, for example, if wage growth is slowing and if maybe the unemployment rate starts to tick up, will that make you sort of decrease your focus on job openings? What do you see? Are wages what's really important? How are you thinking about the labor market as it relates to inflation?
So we talk a lot about vacancies and the vacancy to unemployed rate, but it's just one. It's just another data series. It's been unusually important in this cycle because it's been so out of line. But so has quits, so have wages. So we look at a very wide range of data on the labor market. So I'd start with unemployment, which is typically the single statistic you would look to, is at a 50-year low, 3.5%. We're getting really nothing in labor supply now. We had, I think, a very small increase this year, which we thought we would get that back. Most analysts thought we would get some labor supply coming in. You mentioned wages, so I guess I would characterize that as sort of a mixed picture. It's true with average hourly earnings you see, so I would call it a flattening out at a level that's well above the level that would be consistent over time with 2% inflation, assuming a reasonable productivity. There with the ECI reading this week, again, a mixed picture. The headline number was a disappointment. Let's just say it was high. It didn't show a decline. There's some rays of light inside that if you look at private sector workers, that did come down. The compensation did come down. But overall, though, the broader picture is of an overheated labor market where demand substantially exceeds supply. Job creation still exceeds, the sort of the level that would hold the market where it is. So that's the picture. Do we see? We keep looking for signs that sort of the beginning of a gradual softening is happening. And maybe that's there, but it's not obvious to me because wages aren't coming down; they're just moving sideways at an elevated level, both ECI and average hourly earnings. We want to see. We would love to see. Vacancies coming down, quits coming down. They are coming down. Vacancies are below their all-time high, but not by as much as we thought because, and that the data series is volatile. We never take any one reading. We always look at 2 or 3. So it's a mixed picture. I don't see the case for real softening just yet, but we look at. I guess as I just showed you, we look at a very broad range of data on the labor market.
So do you see wages as being a significant driver of inflation?
I think wages have an effect on inflation, and inflation has an effect on wages. I think that's always been the case. There's always a going back and forth. The question is that really elevated right now? I don't think so. I don't think wages are the principal story of why prices are going up. I don't think that. I also don't think that we see a wage price spiral. But again, it's not something you can, once you see it, you're in trouble. So we don't want to see it. We want wages to go up. We just want them to go up at a level that's sustainable and consistent with 2% inflation. And we do think that given the data that we have, that this labor market can soften without having to soften as much as history would indicate through the unemployment channel. It can soften through job openings declining. We think there's room for that, but we won't know that. That'll be discovered empirically.
Thank you so much. Kayla Tausche from CNBC. Earlier last month, the United Nations warned that there could be a global recession if central banks didn't change course. The new UK Prime Minister warned of a profound economic crisis there. And I'm wondering how the Fed is weighing international developments in light of
ダウ
a
の下が
very
り
strong
も激しいな。
economy here in the US that would seem to be
あ
bucking
ー、
those
S&P も
trends.
か。
So, of course, we keep close tabs on economic developments
下
and
げか
also
の売りで入る
political matters
か
that are。relevant to the economy abroad. We're in very frequent contact with our foreign counterparts, both through the IMF meetings and the regular meetings with central banks that we have, and I have one this weekend with many central bankers. So we're in touch with all of that. So I guess it's clearly a difficult time in the global economy. We're seeing very high inflation in Europe, significantly because of high energy prices related to the war in Ukraine, and we're seeing China's having issues with the zero COVID policy and much slower growth than we're used to seeing. So we see those difficulties. The strong dollar is a challenge for some countries, but we have we take all of that into account in our models. We think about the spillovers and that sort of thing. Here in the United States, we have a strong economy, and we have an economy where inflation is running at 5%. Core PCE inflation, which is a really good indicator of what's going on for us, is the way we see it, is running at 5.1% on a 12-month basis, and sort of similar to that on a 3, 6, and 9-month basis. So we know that we need to use our tools to get inflation under control. The world's not going to be better off if we fail to do that. That's a task we need to do. Price stability in the United States is a good thing for the global economy over a long period of time. Price stability is the kind of thing that pays dividends for our economy for decades, hopefully. Even though it may be difficult to get it back, getting it back is something that provides value to the people we serve for the long run.
If I could just follow up on that. Thank you. The Fed has acknowledged in the past that the tools that you have don't affect things like energy and food prices that stem from some of those conflicts overseas, and they're some of the biggest pain points for consumers. So as you pursue the current path that you've outlined, is there a risk that some of those prices simply don't come down?
So we don't directly affect, for the most part, food and energy prices, but the demand channel does affect them just at the margin. The thing about the United States is that we also have strong, in many other jurisdictions, the principal problem really is energy. In the United States, we also have a demand issue. We've got an imbalance between demand and supply, which you see in many parts of the economy. So our tools are well suited to work on that problem, and that's what we're doing. You're right, though. We don't, the price of oil is set globally, and it's not something we can affect. I think by the actions that we take, though, we help keep longer-term inflation expectations anchored, and keep the public believing in 2% inflation by the things that we do, even in times when energy is part of the story of why inflation is high.
馬の実下がっている割には VIX もハイイールド債や
ビックスは上がってこないですよね。
is facing two more ethics-related incidents with the revision of the financial statements from President Bostic and President Bullard speaking at a closed event.
そうですね。
Some senators like Elizabeth Warren are saying that this is a sign of greater ethics
今日はもう寝た方がいいかもしれないですね。
Could you talk about what this does to the public's trust in the bank and what the Fed is doing to prevent this kind of behavior from becoming common?
Sure. So you're right. The public's trust is really the Fed's and any central bank's most important asset. And anytime one of the policymakers violates or falls short of those rules, we do risk undermining that trust, and we take that very seriously. We do. So at the beginning of our meeting yesterday, actually, we had a committee discussion of the full committee on the importance of holding ourselves individually and collectively accountable for knowing and following the high standard that's set out in our existing rules with respect to both personal investment activities and external communications. And we've taken a number of steps, and I would just say we do understand how important those issues are. I would say that our new investment program that we have is up now and running.
まだわかんないですね。
Through that the problems with President Bostic's disclosures were discovered when he filed his new disclosures. That's, we now have a central group here at the Board of Governors that looks into disclosures and follows them and approves people's disclosures and also all of their trades. Any trade anyone has to make who's covered has to be approved. It has to be approved.
一応ちょっと回復してもね、金曜日雇用統計あるからね、そこで
It's a really good system. It worked here.
そこで落ちるかなと思うんですけどね。
Yesterday morning, we recommitted to each other and to this institution.
なので雇用統計見てから入るかなっていう感じですかね。ハト派的なことをここで期待してて、本来は上がるはずだったんですけどね。これが下がってるから結構期待裏切られちゃったかなっていうのがありますね。マーケットはパウエルさんの発言で上がることを期待してたんですけどね。
Michael McKee from Bloomberg Television and Radio. Earlier this year, you touted the 3-month bill.
なんでここでもう上がんなかったら明日も上がんないし、金曜の雇用統計も上がるはずもないし。
That curve is only 2 basis points away from inversion now, so I'm wondering why you are so confident.
また CPI でそこを打ってから。
中間選挙 CPI ですから全部平穏無事に通過するか判断が難しいですね。
そうですね。CPI で一旦そこをつけてから反発っていうのが上がりやすいシナリオかなっていう感じしますけどね。土日今日はもう寝て、明日マーケットの様子見てからかなっていう。
You also said several meetings
土
ago
日
that
今日入れないわっていう。
the risk of doing too much. Is what you're trying to tell us today is that that risk assessment has changed a little bit?
Well, what's happened is time has passed and we've raised interest rates by 375 basis points. I would not change a word in that statement, though. I think until we get inflation down, you'll be hearing that from me. Again, if we over tighten. And we don't want to, we want to get this exactly right. But if we over tighten, then we have the ability with our tools, which are powerful, to, as we showed at the beginning of the pandemic episode, we can support economic activity strongly if that happens, if that's necessary. On the other hand, if you make the mistake in the other direction and
明日仕事なんでね。休みじゃないですよね。
You're realizing you didn't actually get it. You have to go back in. By then, the risk really is that it has become entrenched in people's thinking, and the record is that the employment costs, the cost to the people that we don't want to hurt, they go up with the passage of time. That's really how I look at it. So. That isn't going to change. What has changed, though, you're right, is we're farther along now, and I think as we're farther along, we're now focused on that. What's the level we need to get to rates, and I don't know what we'll do when we get there. By the way, it doesn't. We'll have to see. There's been no decision or discussion around exactly what steps we would take at that point. But the first thing is to find your way there.
Thank you. Chris Rugaber at Associated Press. Just to go back to housing for a minute, you mentioned the impact that
あ、そうですか。今戻ってますかね、今。行ってこいなってますね。
Private real-time data is clearly showing these hits to housing. Are you going to need to put a greater weight on that in order to ascertain things like whether there's over-tightening going on? Or will you still focus as much on the more lagging government indicators?
So this is an interesting subject. So I start by saying, I guess, that the measure that's in the CPI and the PCE, it captures rents for all tenants, not just new leases. And that makes sense, actually, because for that reason, that conceptually, that's sort of the right target for monetary policy. And the same thing is true for owner's equivalent rent, which comes off of, it's a reweighting of tenant rents. The private measures are of course good at picking up the at the margin the new leases, and they tell you a couple things. One thing is,
若干反発の目処あるんだよ
if you look at
な
the pattern of that series of the new leases, it's very pro-cyclical. So rents went up much more than the CPI and PCE rents did, and now they're coming down faster. So the implication is that there are still, as non-new leases roll over and become and expire, right? There's still in the pipeline. There's still some significant rate increases coming, okay? But at some point, once you get through that, the new leases are going to tell you that what they're telling you is there will come a point at which rent inflation will start to come down. But that point is well out from where we are now. So we're well aware of that, of course, and we look at it. And we've.
あ、桑波さん、遅くまでありがとうございまし
The
た
right way to think about inflation really is to look at the
明日もね、
at
配
the measure that we
信
look at,
する予
but
定です
considering that we also know that at some point you'll see rents coming down.
そうですね、自分ももう今日は寝ようかなと思いますね。
Your announcement so far, is that something you wanted to see? Is that a problem, or how that might affect your future policy to see this?
まあこのタカ派的な発言を受けて明日どうなるかですよね。 タカ派的だったけど、まだ下だから買っていこうっていう人がいるかもしれないですね。
Before we get to that level of interest rates that we think is sufficiently restrictive. And putting that in the statement and identifying that as a goal is an important step. And that's meant to put that question really as the important one now going forward. I've also said that we think that the level of rates that we estimated in September, the incoming data suggests that that's actually going to be higher. And that's been the pattern. I mean, I would have...
ああ、スナップチャット売ればよかったな。
If we made a forecast today, if we were
まだ売れるな、
doing
スナップチャッ
this
ト。
today, the pattern has been that one after another,
高めだからな。
that'll end when it ends, but there's no sense that inflation is coming down.
ズームダメか。ズームダメなんだ。
The last 12 months of 12-month readings, and there's really no pattern there. We're exactly where we were a year ago. So, okay. So I would also say it's premature to discuss pausing, and it's not something that we're thinking about. That's really not a conversation to be had now. We have a ways to go. And the last thing I'll say is that I would want people to understand our commitment to getting this done, and to not making the mistake of not doing enough, or the mistake of withdrawing our strong policy and doing that too soon. So I control those messages, and that's my job.
Edward Lawrence with Fox Business. Thank you, Fed Chairman. So how big of a headwind is all the fiscal spending to what the Federal Reserve is trying to do to get inflation back to the 2% target?
You know, in theory, it was a headwind this year, but I do think the broader context is that you have households that have these significant amounts of savings and can keep spending, even in. So I think those two things do tend to sort of counterbalance each other out. It appears consumer spending is still positive. It's at pretty modest growth levels. It's not shrinking, but people are, the banks that deal with retail customers and many retailers will tell you that the consumers are still buying, and they're still they're fine. So I don't know how big the fiscal headwinds are, and they haven't shown up in the way that we thought they would in restraining spending. So it must have to do with the savings that people have.
What about the spending? There's tens of billions yet to be spent. I mean, from the Inflation Reduction Act, the American Rescue Plan, CHIPS Act, bipartisan infrastructure bill. How does that play into your thinking about the future?
You know, it's demand is going to have some support from those savings, and also from the strong demand that's still in the labor market. We still see pretty significant demand and a tightening labor market in some respects, although I think overall I would say it's not really tightening or loosening. So we see those things, and what those things tell us is that, you know, our job is going to require some resolve and some patience over time. We're going to have to stick with this. You know, that's just we take all that as a given, but we know what our objective is and we know what our tools can do, and that's how we think about it.
Hi, Chair Powell. Nancy Marshall-Genzer from Marketplace. I'm wondering, has the window for a soft landing narrowed? Do you still think it's possible?
Has it narrowed? Yes. Is it still possible? Yes. I think we've always said it was going to be difficult, but I think to the extent rates have to go higher and stay higher for longer, it becomes harder to see the path. It's narrowed. I would say the path has narrowed over the course of the last year, really. Hard to say. Hard to say. You know, again, I would say that the sort of array of data in the labor market is highly unusual, and to many economists, there is a path to. Ordinarily, there's a relationship to GDP going down and vacancies declining, translating into unemployment. Or there's so all those things are relationships that are in the data, and they're very real. Data is a little bit different this time, though, because you have this tremendously high level of vacancies, and we think on a very steep part of the beverage curve. All I would say is that the job losses may turn out to be less than would be indicated by those traditional measures because job openings are so elevated and because the labor market is so strong. You know, again, that's going to be something we discover empirically. I think no one knows whether there's going to be a recession or not, and if so, how bad that recession would be. And you know, our job is to restore price stability so that we can have a strong labor market that benefits all over time, and that's what we're going to do.
But just real quickly, why do you feel like the window has narrowed?
Because we haven't seen inflation coming down. The implication of inflation not coming down, what we would expect by now to have seen is that as the supply side problems had resolved themselves, we would have expected goods inflation to come down by now, long since by now, and it really hasn't. Although it has come down, but it's not to the extent we had hoped. At the same time, now you see services inflation, core services inflation moving up.
メタもね。
I just think that the
メブスは買ってもいいかな、この時代なら。
Without question, that means that we have to have policy be more restrictive, and that narrows the path to a soft landing.
メブス買っちゃおうかな。
Thanks very much.
終わっちゃった。がどう動く。メブスなら50万ぐらい買おうかな。終わった。メブス 10% も上がってんじゃん。 そうね。下すぎるんだよな、ここから入るのも。3800切るかどうかだな。うーん。よか悩むけどね。ちょっとね、厳しいんだよな。ここあったら入るかな、みんな。ここもあるしな。30分だけど。ここあるとしたら、ちょっと一旦上がってから下がるよね。あるとしたら。 でも今から入ってもね、儲けがない気がするな。明日見よっか。2%も今日下げてんの。で、止まんないな。S&P まだここで高いからな。うーん。下がってるけどな。金利は戻してきてるよな。俺はね、明日見よっかな、今日は。今夜入ってもね、取れんと思う。取れん、これ。明日見てからだな。反発するかもしんない可能性があるんだよな。 反発あると思う。だったらブル変えようって言うけど。じゃあ今日はこの辺で終わりましょうかね。また明日見てからですね。はい。ということでご視聴ありがとうございました。おやすみなさい。では、ありがとうございました。おやすみなさい。では、お疲れ様です。ありがとうございました。